Welcome to this session. In this particular session, we are going to talk about various types of systems with a view that each of the systems, each of the different kind of systems, they would have a differing requirement in terms of operating system design. In this particular session, we will try to trace a bit of a history, starting with the early mainframe systems, which were essentially batch systems. Then we would talk about desktop systems, that is a PC. Then we would go on talking about current day systems, which will be multi-processing systems and multiprocessing systems. We would also talk about distributed systems, which would include clusters, grids, and finally we will also briefly touch upon real-time systems. So to begin with, let us let us look at a first type of let us look at a mainframes, early days mainframe systems. Early days mainframe systems, they were large systems. They were very expensive, and early days mainframes were a batch system. I would shortly describe what it means to say a system being a batch system. For its input and output operation, these systems, they use punch card. These punch cards were known as a Hollerith card, and it used tape for a data, punch card and tape for a data and code input, and for results, etc., it used mostly it used printer for results and error reporting. Just to give you how a punch card used to look like, you can say this was a hard card, and this had 80 columns. 80 columns numbered from 0 to 80, and it had 12 rows. So it could one could type 80 characters on a single card. Let us define what let us look at characteristics of a batch system. A batch system, in case of a batch system, user would submit a job, and users would submit the jobs, and operator would collect all these jobs together to form a batch. And these collected jobs, so all the jobs at some point of time, would be loaded into the card reader, and card reader would read the content, read the code from a card, code and data from the card, and store it into memory. And after that, computer would execute these jobs sequentially, one after the other, and it will produce the result, and this result will eventually get printed onto the printer. And toward the end, once the printout is produced, printout would be collected by the operator, and it will be distributed to the user. So the whole process was that user would submit the job, and the operator would bunch these jobs together, and at some point of a time he would take all these jobs and run on the machine, collect the output, and distribute the output to the user. So there would be a time gap. The total there would be some amount of time which will be taken from the time when job is submitted and when the results are received. Certain characteristics of a batch system. So once a specific job, a particular job starts executing, until unless this job completes, no other job can execute. This was one of the restriction. So meaning to say, if there is a program which executes, and after executing for a while, let's say that it makes a request for a data read, so the data is going to be read. While the data is being read, from the card, it is possible that during that particular period of time CPU is not being utilized, because CPU would process the data which it is going to read from the card reader. So IO operation would be performed, and once the IO gets completed, then only once again CPU would start executing, and once the complete job gets executed, then only the another job can begin. So this was a characteristic of a batch job. This led to what we call as a low CPU utilization, because we've just now seen that when a program is reading data or producing output, CPU is going to be idle. Or similarly, when the CPU is being utilized, at that particular point of a time, your devices like a card reader or a printer is going to remain idle. These batch systems, they offer literally no user interaction, and batch systems are appropriate for executing large jobs that require little or literally no interaction. The diagram given here indicates that what was our organization at a high level organization. The card reader is used for reading the program or a data. Then the computer would execute the read program, and the output will get produced on the printer. So let us look at that how the memory can be organized. So in case of such a system, operating system, we know that knowing that operating system is a program, it would require some amount of memory. So we have a area which is reserved for the operating system, and then the user program or the specific user program is going to be loaded in some area. So the entire memory can be partitioned into two simple areas: operating system area and user program area. The requirement here in terms of managing the memory is very simple, in the sense that user program should not, while it is executing, it should not get into the area which is belonging to the operating system, and in same manner operating system program while executing should not get into the area of user program. It's the basic essentially what do we mean here is that the territorial integrity of each program is required to be maintained. So in case of a batch system, the memory management requirements were very simple. The main function of a batch processing system OS was to transfer the control from one job to another job. As we have seen that operator would take the user's job, bunch them together. So one of the function of our operating system here was transferring the control from one job to another job. Now when a control is required to be transferred, immediately it gives rise to certain issues. The main issues which are going to be there, they are how the system is going to know about the nature of the job, meaning to say that there can be a program which can be a Fortran program, there can be another program which can be probably a Pascal or a COBOL or a assembly program. So how the system is going to know that a given job is what kind of a job it is. So this is one of the issue which system would need to know. Then another important things which is there is that system also needs to know differentiate between a one job from the other job, because all the jobs are going to be there on the card, and we would bunch all the user programs together and give it into the put into the card reader. So the system needs to know one job from the other job. Similarly, system would also need to know data from a program. primarily for the reason that program would consist of set of logically arranged instructions, and these instructions are going to perform certain operations. So, while a machine executes the instruction, what it does, it decodes the instruction to find out that what operation is required to be performed. For an example, if we say add a comma b, this essentially says that the instruction, let us say that we have an instruction add a comma b. So, add is an instruction. When processor would decode add, it knows that this is a addition operation and it requires to read two operand a and b and needs to add them. So, decoding is required before the execution, whereas the operand does not need to be decoded. That is, when processor is going to read the data a and b, the data a and b need not be decoded, where the add instruction needs to be decoded. So, it is important that system tries to differentiate between a data and program. Now, so what is the solution? These are the issues. The solution was offered in form of development of what we call as a job control language. There were special the job control language. It consisted of a certain set of commands which helped machine to identify or differentiate one job from another job, or identify the nature of a job. For an example, on a machine like a IBM 1130, which used to use punch card, it was a batch system, used to use a whole list card for its operation. To distinguish program, to distinguish a Fortran program, it used to insert a control card which will begin with //job ftn //ftn. That essentially means that this particular program is a Fortran program. So, job control language offered a mechanism to discern among the various types of jobs and discern the one job from the other job, discern data from a program. Let us just try to understand a bit about performance of the batch systems. So, as it is mentioned that users would submit a set of a job. So, there is a job submission time. So, let us say a job gets submitted in the period between T0 to T1. This is the time when the jobs are going to be submitted. Once and at some point of a time T1, let us say operator is going to form the batch. Operator is going to pull out a different kind of jobs together and form a batch, and then at a point, say after having formed the batch, operator is going to run these programs. So, from a T2 to T3, let us say that my job J1 to Jn, they are going to get executed, and at say point T4, the printing of a result is going to take place between a T4 to T5, and at a T6 the jobs are going to be distributed. So, a user submits, if I say that a user submits a job at a T0, and probably user would receive job at a time T6. Now, from this we can try to figure out that how well or how badly a system is performing. So, we define a performance measure, we call it as a throughput time. Throughput time is going to be defined as total time divided by the total number of jobs, or inverse of it can be also considered as a throughput, where the number of jobs executed in a given interval of a time. So, this would become a performance measure, and based on this one can say that how well or how badly a given system is performing. The another improvement that was introduced in a batch system was termed as a batch system with a spooling. Batch system with a spooling. So the previous diagram, which had where the batch system was indicated, it had a card reader, it had a computer, it had a printer. In this case, we know that the card readers, they are very slow. Similarly, card reader and printers being a mechanical devices, they are very slow. The early days card readers, they offered card reading capacity. The capacity of the card reader was defined in terms of a number of cards which it can read in 1 second. So it was pretty common to have a card reader which would be able to read 800 cards per minute or 1000 cards per minute. And we can very clearly find out that 800 can be translated into a number of characters which it can read in a minute. So every card is every card is can have 80 characters and a 800 card. So 80 multiplied by 800, so that would give me a 64,000 characters. So in a minute, these machines would be able to read 64,000 character, whereas CPU would be able to handle a much more data. CPU will be able to handle data in probably a megabytes of data in a minute itself. So the card readers and the printers, being a purely mechanical devices, they were very, very slow, and so this was the main concern with the help with the batch systems. So to improve the overall performance, spooling was thought of, where what was done, that the computer was connected to a desk, and by this time the disks were already there in the market. So computers were connected to a magnetic desk. So what was done, that the card reader was used to read the card, and the information was stored on the desk, and the computer would read data from the disk rather than directly reading the data from the card reader. Primarily for one reason, that the disks were relatively faster as compared to the card reader. Card readers were slow. So in an offline mode, the information from a card reader can be read, kept onto the desk. So when the computer would execute, computer would read the data and code from the desk, execute the program, produce all the result, and put it back onto the desk, rather than sending it to the printer, because printers were once again very they were mechanical, and their speed was specified in lines per minute, and it was a common thing to have a printer which will print say 300 lines per minute or things like that. So the printers were again very, very slow devices. So to solve the problem, the output of the computer was put onto the desk, and in an offline mode, from the desk the data can be printed. So using this, the performance of a batch system was enhanced, but still the fact was that while a program is executing on a batch system, there is no way other program could execute. Until unless a program finishes, the other program cannot execute on this system. So let us just try to understand a bit about CPU and I/O operation of a process. When a particular program is executing, how the CPU and I/O operation occurs. We should notice that every executing program will first have a CPU burst, meaning to say there would be some code which will first execute on the CPU. There would be an instruction. The instructions have to be executed to begin with onto the CPU. So when CPU would execute instruction, these instruction can be corresponding to instruction corresponding to a computation or instruction corresponding to accessing an I/O devices. So, every executing program usually will have a CPU as a first thing, and then followed by a I/O, then followed by a CPU burst, and then I/O burst, and so on. Please note one thing, that the last burst is always a CPU burst. We will see that why such a restriction is there with the machines, that last burst is always a CPU burst, why not an I/O burst, meaning to say that why not a particular program gives a command to say print a particular file on a printer, and then printer prints and it exits, directly exits. It does not happen this way. Once the printer has printed, probably what printer does, printer tells back the operating system that it has finished printing, and hence after receiving a status from the printer that the job is done nicely, OS terminates the program. So, the last CPU burst is always last burst is always going to be a CPU burst. What were the problems of a mainframe systems? The early mainframe systems were inefficient, primarily for the reason that execution, meaning to say CPU operation and I/O was done in a sequential manner, meaning to say at a time when CPU is being utilized, I/O device will not be utilized, and when I/O is being utilized, CPU will not be utilized. This is this is problem number one. Second problem, I/O devices being many a times mechanical devices are much slower than the CPU devices. As a consequence, if a CPU makes a request for reading a data, let us say CPU can execute 1 million instructions in a second, whereas for it to execute a 1 million instruction, let us say that it requires a 2 megabytes of a data, whereas your I/O device probably can provide you only 1 megabyte of a data in a 1 second. So, that would mean that until unless 2 megabytes of data is complete data is provided, CPU cannot be completing its task, meaning to say thereby the CPU would probably take 2 seconds rather than taking 1 second to complete the job. So, because of I/O devices being much slower to the CPU, it led to a poor CPU utilization. This was a problem which became very apparent. The solution was sought, and the solution, mainly one of the apparent solution was that perform CPU and I/O operation in a concurrent manner, meaning to say while CPU is executing an instruction, I/O device could be fetching data simultaneously. Both of the devices should be working parallelly. This is what this kind of a solution was envisaged. This led to what we call as a multi-programming. We will shortly see that what does it mean to say a multi-programming, and to implement a multi-programming, what we used a concept of a time sharing. So, let us define that. Let us define multi-programming. Multi-programming is defined for a single CPU machines. So, we are assuming that we have a computing system which has a one and only one CPU. It is a single CPU machine, meaning to say that at any given point of a time, the CPU could be executing one job. It cannot execute multiple jobs at a same instance of a time, because CPU being a single CPU. So, what does it mean to say a multi-programming? In case of multi-programming, what is done? Multiple programs are kept in memory, and one program is executed at a given point of a time. And so, let us assume that we are having say n number of programs in a memory. Now, we start executing one of the program. Now, it may just happen that this program, once it starts executing, it might make a request for IO service. It might want to read a data, or it might want to write some information onto the printer. So, as soon as the program, the executing program tries to access an IO device, knowing well that IO device is much slower as compared to the execution of a processor, what can be done? The currently executing program can be suspended, and another program which is residing in a memory can be started. So we say that when a running program makes a request for a IO, this program can be suspended and another program can be started. So here in this case, what would happen, that the time when a first program is waiting for its IO to complete, then second program which was already resident in the memory has started executing, and possibly when the first program its IO gets completed, at some point of a time, once again this program can execute on a CPU and it can complete it. So from this we can clearly see that multi-programming would improve the CPU utilization, and it will also improve the overall throughput of the system. Once again, having introduced the concept of a multi-programming, we should clearly see that to be able to have a system which will support multi-programming, the memory management scheme is changed. In a batch processing system, we saw that we had a memory which was just partitioned into two parts, one being a operating system and another being a user area, whereas now we can see that we have a operating system and we have a multiple jobs, job 1, job 2, job 3, job 4, job n, and each of the jobs could be belonging to a different user. So now the issue is, once again the issue here is maintaining the territorial integrity, but now if we compare it with a batch processing job, the issue is much more complicated. Here we have a n number of jobs and we need to protect one job from the other job, and at the same time we also need to protect operating system from all the jobs. There is also, so once multiple jobs are there is also at time a requirement that two jobs could want to share the information. That is, a job 1 may want to share some information with job 2. So in this again the issue becomes more complicated, where sharing is required. That would mean that job 1 should be able to access certain areas belonging to job 2, and job 2 should be able to access certain area belonging to job 1. So we can see that in case of a multi-programming, the memory management requirements are going to be changing. Some of the features which is desired feature which is required for a multi-programming systems. One of the point which I am mentioning here is the IO routines are supplied by the system. We would at some point of a time elaborate more that why all the IO routines are going to be supplied by the system, why not the responsibility of accessing IO is given to the user program. We will see in a later discussions. Memory management. For a memory management, system must allocate memory to the several jobs. Now when the system is going to allocate the memory to the several jobs, there are several questions which would arise. A given system has a finite amount of a memory. So, the question which will arise there is that what is the amount of a memory which should be allocated to each job? Should each job be allocated equal amount of a memory, or should jobs be allocated memory depending on their importance? So, there are issues, there are questions which are going to arise, which are required to be handled. Then the next issue which is required to be addressed there is, in the memory there are multiple programs, multiple jobs which are residing in the memory. Now, the question would arise, which particular job should get executed on the CPU? It leads to a scheduling decision, that how to schedule the various jobs. So, again the question, again the questions are asked, that how do we schedule the job, which particular job should be scheduled? There can be approaches. So, it led to the development of what we call as a CPU scheduling algorithm, and there are variety of a CPU scheduling algorithm. For example, first come first serve is being one of the example, where a CPU is allocated based on the order in which a particular job is submitted or a particular job arrives. This particular scheduling algorithm, you would see that is trying to achieve the fairness. If I consider each job is belonging to one specific user, then I can say that first come first serve method is trying to be fair to the users by scheduling the jobs in an order in which the users arrive and submit their jobs. So, CPU scheduling is a requirement, required feature for the operating system, which would support multi-programming. In addition to this, when there are multiple jobs, each of the jobs could actually be requesting the various I/O devices. So, it is possible that at given point of a time, some devices are allocated to one job, other set of devices are allocated to another set of a job. So, the allocation of a devices, utilization of a resources in an optimal manner has to be achieved, and these are the features which would be desired from a multi-programming operating system. A little while ago, we had mentioned that we had mentioned a term, time sharing. So, how we know here that we have a single processor, we are talking about a single processor system, single CPU system. So, on a single CPU system, how I am going to achieve multi-programming? We know multiple programs are residing in memory. So, in multi-programming on a single CPU system is achieved using what we call as a time sharing mechanism. Here in this mechanism, unit time is taken, it is divided into a small slice, and each time slice is assigned to each job in a round robin manner. So, if for an example, if I say that I have 3 jobs, and I have a time slice of 100 millisecond. So, it is the first job is job A. Let us say I have a 3 job A, B, C. So, job A will initially get a 10 millisecond time. Once its time slice gets over, then job B would get a 10 millisecond time. Once its time slice gets over, then job C will get 10 millisecond time, and after job C completes its 10 millisecond, once again job A will get 10 millisecond. So, the time slice in a round robin manner can be allocated to the various jobs, and the time slice can be kept very small to give an illusion that all the time machine is available to every user. So, the advantage of a time sharing is that a time shared OS would allow many users to share the computer simultaneously, and every user would get a feeling that computer is completely dedicated to it, and it is only executing its code. Now, how immediately the question arises that how the time sharing is implemented, what are the requirement of a time sharing. So, one can very clearly see that in this case, since time slice is created and it is going to be distributed, it is desired that there should be some method and mechanism provided in the operating system which will keep track of a time, keep track of each time slice, and keep track that which particular job has been allocated how much time. Time shared, in case of a time shared system, it requires a dynamic resource allocation. As and when a specific job would execute, a specific job gets allocated CPU, it might make a request for a resource, and that resource has to be allocated dynamically. So, we find that in case of a time shared system, the resource allocation, we require a dynamic resource allocation, meaning to say memory, IOs, etc. are dynamically to be allocated. It is also possible at some point of a time that a particular program, while it is executing and it demands a large amount of a memory, and that much memory is not available. So, in such a scenario, it is possible that there are two possibilities which arise. One is stop the execution till the time additional amount of a memory becomes available to this executing job, which may never actually occur, because currently this is a job which is executing and it is demanding for a more resource. So, until unless the other programs they execute, they are not going to release the resources which they are occupying. So, there is no way resources are going to be released. So, the second approach would be that this particular program can be swapped out, it can be taken out from a main memory to the backing store, that is onto the hard disk. So, as a consequence, this particular program which is moved to the backing store, all the resources which are allocated to it are going to be released, and these resources are being made available to the other executing program. Probably other executing program can utilize these resources and execute, and at some suitable point of a time, the program which was put onto the hard disk or swapped out can be brought back into the main memory and can be executed. So, this is what we mean by a dynamic resource allocation, and we would see that a dynamic resource allocation would require elaborate resource management and access control techniques. So, the early days system they had issues and problems. Let us just try to see what were the main concerns. One of the main concern of these systems was a very high cost. These machines, these mainframes were hugely expensive machine. I remember Bill Gates having said that probably there would be a time when world would need 8 to 10 computers. So, this was the prediction which Bill Gates gave, and this was primarily because of the fact that these machines were hugely expensive machines. The cost necessitated a concept of a resource sharing, if the machines were very expensive, it was thought that if the resources can be shared among multiple jobs or a multiple user, then probably the cost can be distributed over the multiple applications. So this led to a certain kind of a development. One of most important development is a computer network. It led to a development of a computer network. Another important things which actually helped was a technological development and development in field of IC fabrication, which has actually resulted into complicated circuits being built at a very low cost. And of course, the applications, the programming applications are the main drivers for the development of a faster processor and computing system. Let us take a look at another kind of a computing machine which became prevalent starting sometimes back in 80s. This was termed as a desktop, or it was termed as a PC, personal computer. These machines, they were designed to serve a single user, and these machines were single tasking. In those days, these machines were designed to be a single tasking machine. What do we mean by saying a single tasking machine? We mean that a machine which will execute one task at a time, whereas a corresponding word to a single tasking would be a multitasking, meaning to say that as the name itself suggests, something which is capable of doing a multiple task. And multitasking is achieved in a current day systems using what we call as a multi-programming. So if we look at a current day desktop machines, current day PCs, we find all these PCs are multitasking. Whereas in 80s, the machines, the PCs which were developed, they were running what we mostly they were running an operating system which was named as a Microsoft MS-DOS, and MS-DOS was essentially single tasking, single user operating system, which will allow you to execute one program at a time, and it offered a command line interface through which the user could type in a command and execute the command. Once the command completes its execution, then a next command can be typed and executed. So the early days desktop systems, they were single tasking. The current day desktop systems are multitasking. If a system, let us look this particular thing from the angle of operating system design. A single tasking operating system, we know that the memory requirement for such a system could be very simple. In the sense, we can have simply two partitions, one for our operating system and another for a user program, just like a batch system. In case of a desktop system, the concern here was to improve the response time. It was a dedicated machine to a single user, and this was enabled primarily because of the fact that in early 80s the microprocessors had developed and they had come into the market, and their cost was really quite low as compared to earlier CPUs which were used in mainframes. So the desktop systems, they were designed with a different objective. They were designed to improve the response time, to provide the interaction, whereas a batch, we've seen that the batch systems, they were offered any kind of interaction to the user, and this became possible possible for the reason that by 80s a lot of peripheral devices were also developed. The devices like a keyboard and a display units were developed, which would facilitate the direct interaction, which was not possible in case when we were interacting using a card reader and printer. And we should also notice that since this PC served a single user and it was a single tasking, optimal resource utilization or a protection was not at all a concern, because all the resources which are there in the system, they could potentially be allocated to a single task and a single user. So the optimal utilization is not at all a concern. It was not at all a concern for operating system designer those days. Operating system MS-DOS operating system designer. As I had already mentioned, that a present day PC, they support time sharing, multi-programming, and these are network enabled, meaning to say they can the resource sharing can be carried out over the network. As we know that applications have been the main change drivers for developing a faster and better computing system. So there was a requirement in terms of improving the execution capability of the existing machine. So there were various approaches which could have been adopted for improving the performance. One of such approach was using a parallel computing to improve the performance. So this gave rise to a development of what we call as a parallel and distributed system. Let us see that in what way parallel and distributed system would improve the performance. So once again, I just want to give a very simple example. In our early childhood days, we would have been always posed a question in a maths class where it would have been said that a particular job which is done by a one person in a 10-day, then 5 people would do this job in how many days? Our answer after a certain amount of a calculation would be that it would take 2 days. Why? It was thought that all these 5 people, they can parallelly do the job and complete it in a lesser amount of a time. So same notion is utilized for constructing what we call as a parallel and distributed system. So this from a so it is very evident, very clear that if we can execute jobs in parallel, the execution performance would improve. Now the immediate question arises, how do you execute things in parallel? What are the various approaches for parallel processing? There are quite a few approaches which are prevalent. The approaches which are at an architectural level, where by introduction of a pipelining, for an example instruction pipelining, where instruction is executed in a pipeline manner to improve the performance, or multiplicity of a component. I can have a multiple processor in a system. Instead of having a one CPU, I can have more than one CPU in the system. So there are various techniques. There are various techniques which are described in architecture to carry out the to design a parallel systems. And when we are talking about a multiprocessor system, they can be broadly categorized into two categories. So I can say that, okay, I am going to have a computer where I am going to have a multiple processors. Now immediately the question arises that, okay, we have a multiple processors in the system, but which particular processor would execute what? will all the microprocessors would be allowed to execute the user program and operating system program, or alternatively that there is a one microprocessor which will be allowed to execute the operating system code, and rest of the microprocessors would be allowed to execute the user program under the command of the first processor. So, this kind of a thinking led to two different kind of multiprocessor systems. They were termed as a symmetric multiprocessing or asymmetric multiprocessing. We will see what is a symmetric multiprocessing and asymmetric multiprocessing shortly. So we've seen a system being built using a multiple component. So in a given system, here we had a multiple processor. Another thing can be that instead of using a one computer, in case of multiprocessing system, what we are doing? We are actually using multiple processors, but we have a single system, we have a single computer, whereas nobody stops us to using multiple computers for getting a job done. So this gave rise to, so what we are looking at? We are looking at a multiplicity of a system. The parallelism can be introduced by multiplicity of a component inside a system, and then parallelism can also be introduced by multiplicity of a system, that we use a multiple systems to solve a particular problem. So multiplicity of a system, that give rise to certain technologies which we called as a cluster or grid. We will shortly see that what are the requirements of a cluster, what are the requirements of a grid computing is. Let us return back, let us devote probably next few minutes understanding briefly that what a multiprocessing system is and what are its advantages. So let us just try to think of a system with a single processor. So if we try to look at a personal computer, internally would have one microprocessor, would probably have a one keyboard, would have a one mouse, would have a hard disk, would have a power supply. So this is one case. Now another case, let us assume that inside the same box, instead of having a one microprocessor, what we are going to do? We are going to have a multiple microprocessor to make it a multiprocessor system. What is the advantage? If suppose we can put a n number of processor and execute our program on these n number of processors, then what is the advantage which we are gaining? We can clearly see, one, if I can execute more number of programs in a given amount of a time, giving the same logic that if one person does a job in 10 days, then two persons would do it in 5 days only. So if I have a two processor, I can be executing two jobs simultaneously. So I'll be able to execute more jobs. So this will lead to increased throughput. It will be economical in the sense that if I try to use two machines to do the job, two jobs, then each machine would require a keyboard, would require a display unit, would require a power supply. Whereas if two CPUs are put into a same machine, then they require only one keyboard, one mouse, one power supply. So we find that it is going to be economical as well. I would even go on to say that it can offer me a greater reliability. I have two processors which are executing various jobs in a machine, and let us assume that one of the processor fails. we can design a system where even when one processor fails, machine keeps executing with the help of another processor. That would mean that this computing system is going to become more reliable if I have a multiple CPU in it. It can tolerate failure of a one CPU, or depending on how many CPUs are there, it can tolerate a failure of a certain number of CPUs. So it is going to give me a greater reliability. Of course, when a failure would occur, there would be a performance degradation. For an example, if a machine had a 2 processor, so 2 processor was executing 2 jobs at a given point of time. Now when one processor fails, so now all the jobs are going to be given to only one processor. So now the users would take more time to execute their jobs. This leads to what we call as a greater availability and fault tolerance. As we were saying, that when the processor is there, whether the processor, what is the capability of the processor inside the machine? Based on that, multiprocessing systems are categorized either as a symmetric multiprocessing system or asymmetric multiprocessing system. In case of a symmetric multiprocessing system, each processor is equally capable. It runs identical copy of a OS. It can execute the OS, it can execute the user program. So there is no processor which is superior to the other processor. There is no processor which runs under the command of the other processor. Every processor is equally capable processor. So in a system where every processor is equally capable, we call such a system as a symmetric multiprocessing system. Whereas in case of a asymmetric multiprocessing, there would be one processor which would be acting as a master, and rest of the processors would be acting as a slave, and those slave processors would be acting on the command of the master processor. So such a system we call as a asymmetric multiprocessor. And since these systems, they share the common memory, these processors, multiple processors, they share the common memory, we call these systems as a tightly coupled systems. So in case of a multiprocessing system, if we start talking in terms of operating system design requirement, we can immediately see the question would arise that there are multiple processors and there are multiple programs in the memory. So now which particular program has to be scheduled on a which particular processor? So immediately such a question would arise. Similarly, it is possible that a particular program which is being executed by a one processor is occupying some memory area. Now another program which is executed on another processor tries to access the same memory area. What happens to such a case? The programs are executing on a different processors. They would be making requests for the IO devices. How the resources are going to be allocated to the devices? Here we can very clearly see that now operating system would need to keep track that how much memory is being allocated for the processes which are executing on a one processor, and how much memory is being allocated for the processes which are executing on another processor. What devices are allocated to the processes which are executing on a one processor? What devices are allocated to the other processes? So there is going to be a elaborate memory and resource management requirement which will become apparent in case of a multiprocessing systems. Let us talk a little bit about a distributed system. We just discussed a multiprocessing system. Till now we have discussed about Multiprogramming. Multiprogramming is essentially deals with systems where we have a one processor and multiple programs in a memory, and at given point of a time only one program executes. Then we've seen multiprocessing. In case of multiprocessing, we have multiple processors available in the system, and at any given point of a time multiple programs that would be equal to the number of processors existing in the system can execute simultaneously. Let us talk about a distributed system. These distributed systems are essentially dependent on computer network for their functionality. The example of a distributed system is client server system, where we have a server machine and there are a set of clients. A classical example can be a railway reservation system, where we have a reservation server, a railway server is there, and using your PC or your laptop you connect to the server and try to book your ticket. So we have a clients and we have a server. Every client would try to access the server over the network. So for client to be able to access the server over the network, we find that network is a vital component. Network is a essential component. So there is a one server, and there can be a number of clients which could actually be accessing. This leads to a variety of issues in terms of that how many clients can access a given server, meaning to say that scalability, and how reliable the server is. So the answer can be provided. The server is reliable because it is probably a multi-processor system. So all those issues can be answered. Then we have another kind of a distributed system which we call as a peer-to-peer system. In case of a peer-to-peer system, there are no fixed client and servers. Every single machine can act as a client, or every single machine can act as a server. So for some functionality one machine can act as a client, for another functionality the same machine can act as a server. So such kind of systems are termed as a peer-to-peer. And in such a systems you would find that each system would have its own local memory, and the processors would communicate with each other. Your client and servers would communicate with each other using communication link. So since the client and the server, they are not sharing the same memory, they are not sharing the same bus, they are not sharing the physical devices, we call these systems to be a loosely coupled system. Another kind of a system which is prevalent nowadays, we call cluster systems. Cluster systems are examples where we try to utilize a multiplicity of systems. So definition, if we try to look at the definition of a cluster system, computer cluster consists of a set of loosely connected computers that work together as a single system. So I may have 10 systems, and they're going to be connected in some manner, and to the user they're going to give an illusion that user is working on a single system, whereas at background they can be 10 or any number of systems. So the cluster systems can use multiple CPUs. CPUs are a node to accomplish a computational task. For an example, let's say that I need to multiply two matrices. So the one way of solving this particular problem is I take a one matrix, and I I take another matrix and do a multiplication on the same CPU. Whereas what I can do that, I can take a one row and a one column of a matrix, give it to a CPU number 1, take another second row and a second column, first row and a second column, give it to another CPU. So if suppose I have a 3 cross 3 matrix, two 3 cross 3 matrices, then what essentially I can do that I can actually if I have 9 machines, what I can do that I can parallelly multiply, do the multiplication and find out the matrix multiplication. So each of the node, each of the machine are capable of performing the task. So that is the reason that we say that a cluster uses a multiple CPU to accomplish a computational work. In these cluster nodes, these CPUs or nodes in a cluster are connected to each other through what we through a local area network. As we can clearly see that clusters probably can exploit parallelism would lead to improved performance. We can also see that cluster being multiple clusters are built using multiple systems. So even if one of the systems in the cluster fails, the performance of the overall system though would degrade, but the availability is going to be there. So the cluster computing would offer a greater availability in terms to say that it can offer a higher reliability. What are the various types of clusters which can be there? So clusters again are classified as a asymmetric and a symmetric cluster. So we have at times we have a requirement. Asymmetric example of asymmetric cluster is a failover cluster that we have some very important function which is required to be performed. So we keep a machine using which we are performing the function. At a simultaneous parallelly, what we can do that we can create another machine which will keep monitoring the health of the first machine. In case the first machine goes down, the second machine can take over the activity of the first machine. For an example, you just imagine that say a railway reservation system. So you just imagine that there is a case where railways are using a single system to service millions of a user. So in this case we see it very clearly that if this single system fails, then everything would come to the halt. All the users, nobody would get any access. Whereas the requirement is that this reservation system should be up 24/7 without any failure. So how such a system can be implemented? How one can guarantee 100% reliability, or how one can guarantee absolute availability? These are the machines, and machines can fail. So to solve this particular problem, the approach was that what you do, it is something like that we would have also done such a thing several times, that what we do, we inside our house we find that okay, we have electricity directly coming from the electricity board, and for the failure what we do, every one of us also end up installing an inverter. So there is a backup, electricity backup, that if the electricity from an electricity board fails, then I can have a backup which is coming through my inverter or coming through my own captive power plant. So we need to plan about the backup. So asymmetric clusters are failover cluster, where you have a active machine and you have a hot standby machine, and by some means of heartbeat monitoring, by some means of monitoring the active machine. A hot standby machine keeps monitoring the health of an active machine, and as soon as the active machine fails, the hot standby take over the job. So, such kind of a clusters are termed as a failover cluster. Once again, for such a thing, we can clearly see that the requirement of operating systems are going to be different. In this case, we would need to know that an application which was running, it was at what point of a time, when what point of a time of a execution when the server failed, so that the hot standby can start from that point onwards and can start executing. So, we find that there is a differing requirement for this kind of a system. Then another kind of a cluster which is popular is symmetric cluster. Symmetric clusters are also termed as a load. An example of a symmetric cluster would be a load balancing cluster. The classic example of such clusters are websites, where a website which receives a very large number of users on every day, it cannot be handled through a single web server. So, usually what is done, that multiple web servers are kept, and an application load balancer is used. So, the user requests are distributed across the various web servers. So, we have what we call as a symmetric load balancing cluster. In this case, every server in the cluster performs a useful work, unlike the case of a asymmetric cluster. In case of a asymmetric cluster, there is a hot standby machine. The only work it does, it monitors the health of the active machine. It does not do anything else. It simply monitors the health of a active machine. Whereas in case of a symmetric cluster, every server could be performing a useful work, and if suppose one of the server fails, then the remaining servers, what they do, they continue to execute their own assigned task. In addition to that, they also share the load of the failed server. So, we find that a symmetric cluster can actually turn out to be a more cost effective, in the sense that we have multiple servers, and each servers are assigned to a different task, and in case of a failure of one of the server, some of the server would take over the task carried out by the failed server. But of course, on a negative side, the load, once a server fails, once one of the server fails, so its load is taken over by the another server, which is already catering its own application. It is possible that because of an increased load, this server can also fail, or this server performance can actually go down drastically. So essentially, from the cluster we find that we derive we derive mainly three benefits. One, improved scalability. Second, higher availability, meaning to say that it can tolerate the failure, and the greater flexibility. So, these are the benefits of clusters. Let us look at another kind of a system which are becoming very prevalent in current context. These systems are termed as a real-time systems, and the real-time systems are classified as a hard real-time system or a soft real-time system. For an example, I just would like to give you an example of a say soft real time system. We know that say we streaming server which is streaming a video and we know that okay 23 frames per second delivery is required from the streaming server. So here we find that here we have said that 23 frames in a second are required to be delivered to the user for a proper viewing of the video. Now, why we are calling this system as a soft real time system? We calling this system as a soft real time system primarily for the reason that in case system A instead of delivering 23 frames, even if it delivers 22 frames, we know that it is not going to be catastrophic. The user would probably experience a little glitch in the video, but still user would be able to watch the video. So we find that we have now a requirement from the system that a given task has to be completed in timely manner. Based on this, the real time systems were classified as a hard real time systems and soft real time system. Hard real time systems are those where the deadline cannot be violated. A deadline cannot be violated, whereas in case of a soft real time system the specified deadlines can be violated. So these are the various types of systems which are prevalent in the market. Example for a real time interactive systems are we have a variety of examples of real time systems. Your say washing machines, cell phones, etc. all are examples of real time systems, and these systems they have a differing requirement from the perspective of a operating system design. For an example, if we just look at a washing machine, the washing machine has a different requirement. If we different requirement, its only requirement is that it should be able to perform a certain wash cycles and certain wash cycles in a certain specified manner. But even if it misses its deadline, we don't worry too much about it. Whereas if we take an example of a say cell phone, in case of a cell phone, while we are communicating, we find that we find that abnormal delays would lead to a broken communication. So in case of a cell phone, we find that timeliness is important aspect. So in this particular session, what we have done, we have actually gone through number of different kind of systems, and we've seen these different kind of systems with a view to understand that what all the requirements of each systems are, and we find that these different systems are going to have a differing requirement, and to achieve these different requirements, the operating system designer has to program and has to develop things in a different manner. As an operating system designer, we need to understand this very clearly, that there is a very hard coupling between architecture and the operating system. For with change in architecture, the operating systems design would change, and with change in many a times we find that operating system requirements have led to a change in architecture.